Cruel laughter echoed across the playground as the boy sat helpless in his wheelchair. A tiny figure stepped forward, her tattered clothes in stark contrast to her dignified French. The playground fell silent. The billionaire, watching from his car, couldn't believe what he was witnessing, but no one imagined what would come next. Where in the world are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit that like button for more heartwarming stories that will change your life. The autumn wind carried a chill across Jefferson Elementary's playground, but it wasn't nearly as cold as the laughter aimed at 6-year-old Oliver Blackwood. Strapped in his wheelchair at the bottom of the slide, he watched other children play with longing in his eyes. His condition, a rare form of muscular dystrophy, had confined him to the chair since he was 4. Regardez le petit garçon pathétique. Il ne peut même pas monter les escaliers, sneered Zachary Miller, the third-grade ringleader whose father was the French ambassador's assistant. His followers, all sons of diplomats and executives, laughed on cue. Oliver understood enough French to know they were mocking him. His eyes welled with tears as he gripped his wheelchair's armrests. Despite his father, Richard Blackwood, being worth billions from his tech empire, Oliver couldn't buy what he wanted most, the ability to climb that slide like everyone else. From his Tesla parked across the street, Richard Blackwood watched through tinted windows. He'd insisted on driving Oliver to school himself today instead of sending the chauffeur. Richard had built Blacktree Technologies from nothing into America's 5th largest tech company, but he felt powerless watching his son suffer. Tu ferais mieux de rentrer chez toi dans ton manoir, Zachary continued, approaching Oliver with mock concern. Les échelons sont pour les enfants normaux. Suddenly, a small figure emerged from behind the slide structure. A girl in a faded blue dress with patches at the elbows and dirt-smudged cheeks stepped between Oliver and his tormentors. Laisse-le tranquille, ce n'est pas sa faute s'il ne peut pas marcher. Et ce n'est pas ta place de le juger, she said in flawless French, her voice soft but unwavering. Tu devrais avoir honte. The playground fell silent. Zachary's face drained of color. The girl turned to Oliver, her emerald eyes meeting his. Do you want to go down the slide? I can help you. Oliver nodded hesitantly. Richard watched, transfixed, as this slip of a girl, who couldn't be more than 6 herself, carefully helped his son out of the wheelchair and supported his weight as they climbed the ladder together, one excruciating step at a time. Her name was Emma Pierce, as Richard would later discover. She coughed several times during their climb, a deep, concerning sound. When they reached the top, she positioned Oliver carefully at the slide's entrance, then sat behind him, her arms wrapped protectively around his waist. Ready? She whispered. Oliver's smile lit up his entire face as they slid down together. For those brief seconds, he wasn't the billionaire's disabled son. He was just a boy on a playground, experiencing the simple joy other children took for granted. As Emma helped Oliver back into his wheelchair, she swayed slightly, her face flushed with effort, and something else Richard recognized from his wife's final days, the flush of fever. Richard stepped out of his car, decision made. This child had given his son something no amount of money had been able to buy, and something told him she needed help just as desperately as Oliver did. What he couldn't know was how this moment would change all their lives forever. Emma Pierce hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a half sandwich Mrs. Winters from the shelter had saved for her. But hunger was familiar. It was the fever that worried her. She'd promised Mama before she died 3 months ago that she'd stay strong, stay in school, stay invisible to social services. At 6 years old, Emma understood that foster care meant separation from her remaining family, her 9-year-old brother Jack, currently hiding in an abandoned building 2 blocks from school. She helped Oliver back into his wheelchair, trying to hide her cough. "Thank you," Oliver whispered, his blue eyes wide with gratitude. Before Emma could respond, a tall man in an expensive suit approached them. The playground monitor stepped forward nervously. "Mr. Blackwood, We weren't expecting you until pickup time." Richard Blackwood nodded curtly, but kept his focus on Emma. "Young lady, what's your name?" Emma hesitated. Adults asking questions usually meant trouble. "Emma," she finally answered, taking an instinctive step backward. "Emma what?" "Pierce, sir. Emma Pierce." Richard knelt to her level, his expression softening. "Emma Pierce, you did something remarkable today. Not many children or adults would stand up like that. Where are your parents?" "I'd like to thank them for raising such an exceptional young lady." Emma's face clouded. "My mom died. It's just me and Jack now." Richard's eyebrows furrowed. "And Jack is my brother. He's 9. She didn't mention where he was. Oliver tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad, Emma's really nice. Can she come play at our house?" Richard studied the girl more carefully now. The worn clothes, unwashed hair, the flush of fever, her too thin frame. He'd grown up poor himself before building Blacktree. He recognized the signs. "Emma, where are you staying right now?" Emma looked away. "Around. We manage." The playground monitor, Miss Jenkins, approached. "Mr. Blackwood, Emma's situation is complicated. She's been marked absent frequently, and when she does come, she never has lunch. We've called social services twice, but somehow they never find her or her brother." Emma's eyes widened in panic. "I have to go," she whispered, backing away. "Wait," Richard said gently. "I'm not calling anyone. Oliver has a doctor's appointment now. That's why I'm here early. Would you like to come with us? The doctor could check that cough, and we could get some lunch after." Trust didn't come easily to Emma, but Oliver's hopeful expression and the promise of food, maybe even food she could save for Jack, was too tempting. "My brother. We'll find him too," Richard promised. "No separation. You have my word." In the car, Oliver chatted excitedly while Emma stared wide-eyed at the vehicle's luxury. Richard called his assistant, speaking in hushed tones about finding a boy named Jack near Jefferson Elementary. At Boston Children's Hospital, while Oliver saw his specialist, a pediatrician examined Emma. Richard stood outside the examination room, his phone pressed to his ear. "Harrison, I need everything on the Pierce family. Recent death of mother, 2 children, Emma, age 6, and Jack, age 9. Yes, full background. And call Judge Winters. We may need emergency temporary guardianship. No, I'm not explaining over the phone. Just do it." Inside the room, the doctor's expression was grave as he listened to Emma's lungs. "How long have you had this cough, sweetheart?" "A few weeks," Emma admitted. Richard entered in time to hear the diagnosis: pneumonia, severe malnutrition, and exhaustion. Without proper treatment, the doctor explained quietly to Richard, this child's condition could become life-threatening within days. Outside, Richard's security team texted, "Boy found, scared but safe, awaiting instructions." Richard looked at Emma, small and vulnerable on the examination table, and then at Oliver, watching her with concern. His son had found something precious today, a friend who saw him, not his disability. And Richard had found something too, a purpose beyond business, beyond even being Oliver's father. He just hoped he wasn't too late. By sunset, the Blackwood Mansion's guest wing had 2 new occupants. Jack Pierce stood protectively beside his sister's bed, his wary eyes tracking every movement of the private nurse Richard had hired. The boy had Richard's security team searching for 2 hours before they found him, and he'd only agreed to come after speaking to Emma on the phone. "Your temperature's down to 101.4, the nurse told Emma gently. "The antibiotics are starting to work." Jack hadn't left Emma's side since arriving, refusing food until she woke up. His thin face was a mask of suspicion as he addressed Richard. "Why are you doing this? Nobody does something for nothing." Richard, sitting in a chair near the window, recognized the street-hardened cynicism. "Sometimes people just do the right thing, Jack." "Billionaires don't," Jack shot back. "I read about you in the library computers." Black Tree Technologies, worth $64 billion. People like you don't help people like us unless you want something. Before Richard could respond, Oliver wheeled himself into the room, a children's book on his lap. The hostility in Jack's expression softened slightly at the sight of the boy. "I brought this for Emma," Oliver said, offering the book to Jack. "It's about a brave girl who saves a magical kingdom. Dad used to read it to me when I was sick." Jack accepted the book cautiously. "She likes stories. Mom used to—" His voice broke. Richard watched as his son expertly navigated a conversation with the traumatized 9-year-old. Oliver's condition had given him an empathy beyond his years. "Your mom died too. Mine did when I was 4, Oliver said. "It still hurts sometimes. But my dad says it's okay to be sad." Jack's defensive posture relaxed slightly. "How long can we stay here?" "As long as you need to," Richard answered. "My lawyers are working on temporary guardianship paperwork. No one's separating you two." Emma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "Jack," she called weakly. "I'm here, Em." He rushed to her side. "We're in a mansion. There's food and hot water and everything." Emma's eyes found Richard, then Oliver. "You helped us," she whispered. Richard moved closer to her bed. "You helped Oliver first. I'm just returning the favor." Later that evening, after Emma had eaten soup and fallen back asleep, Richard found Jack sitting alone in the mansion's library, running his fingers over the spines of leather-bound books. "Mum was an English professor before she got sick," Jack said without looking up. "Cancer, no insurance. We lost our apartment 2 weeks after the funeral." Richard sat across from him. "My mother cleaned houses. Died when I was 15. No insurance either." Jack looked up, surprised. "But you're rich. Now, wasn't always." Richard leaned forward. "Jack, I need you to understand something. What I'm offering isn't charity. It's an opportunity. For Emma, for you, and frankly, for Oliver. He's never had friends who treated him normally. What happens when Emma gets better?" The question hung in the air, loaded with fear and hope. "That's partly up to you two," Richard said carefully. "There's a private school near here, Wellington Academy. Excellent programs for gifted children, which I suspect both you and Emma are. They also have exceptional resources for children with physical disabilities like Oliver." Jack's eyes narrowed. "We can't afford private school." "I can." "And what do we have to do for that?" Richard met the boy's suspicious gaze directly. "Be kids. Study hard. Look out for Oliver sometimes, the way Emma did today. That's all." Jack didn't respond immediately, his young mind clearly working through scenarios, weighing trust against survival. "Emma's really smart," he finally said. "She taught herself French from library books and YouTube." Richard nodded. "I noticed. And you?" A flush of pride. "Math. I'm good with numbers." Richard smiled, seeing a younger version of himself. "Then we have a lot to talk about, but first, let's focus on getting your sister healthy. One day at a time, okay?" Jack nodded cautiously, the first hint of hope flickering in his eyes. Outside the library, Oliver sat in his wheelchair, listening. For the first time since his mother died, his father sounded like his old self again. And for the first time in his life, Oliver had friends who didn't see his chair first. Everything was changing, faster than any of them could comprehend. 3 weeks later, Emma's health had improved dramatically. The Blackwood Mansion's guest wing had been transformed. Colourful bedding replaced the neutral tones, bookshelves overflowed with children's literature, and a state-of-the-art computer sat on Jack's desk. But more noticeable was the change in Oliver. He laughed more, challenged himself more, and even started a new physical therapy program with renewed determination. "Hiya, Daddy!" Emma called as Richard pushed her on the garden swing. Jack and Oliver sat nearby, engrossed in a chess match that Oliver was surprisingly winning. Richard complied, pushing the swing higher as Emma's delighted squeals filled the air. In the distance, Harrison Porter, Richard's chief counsel, watched from the terrace with a troubled expression. Later, as the children enjoyed a movie in the media room, Harrison confronted his boss in the study. "The background check on the Pierces is complete," Harrison said, placing a thick folder on Richard's desk. "Their mother, Dr. Eleanor Pierce, was indeed an English professor at Boston University. Terminal cancer, died 3 months ago. But there's more. Their father isn't dead, as the children believe." Richard's expression darkened. "Explain." Matthew Pierce, currently serving 7 years in Massachusetts State Penitentiary for embezzlement and fraud. He stole research funds from the university, nearly destroyed Eleanor's career before they divorced 5 years ago. He's eligible for parole in 8 months. Richard leaned back, digesting this information. "The children don't know he's alive. According to Eleanor's sister's statement, she told them he died in an accident when Emma was a baby. She wanted to protect them from the truth." Harrison hesitated. "There's something else. Eleanor's sister, Catherine Montgomery, has been searching for the children since Eleanor's death. Social services lost track of them." "Find her," Richard said. "Arrange a meeting." 2 days later, Catherine Montgomery sat in Richard's office, her eyes red from crying after being reunited with Jack and Emma. The children were now showing their aunt the garden, accompanied by Oliver and his nurse. "Thank you," Catherine said for the 10th time. "I've been searching everywhere. After Ellie died, I was in Europe on a diplomatic mission. I'm with the State Department. By the time I returned, they had disappeared." "They were living rough," Richard explained. "Jack kept them moving to avoid being separated by the system." Catherine nodded sadly. "Smart boy. Their father's betrayal nearly destroyed Ellie. She was determined they'd never know the truth." "And now?" Richard asked cautiously. "I assume you'll want to take them home with you." Catherine studied him. "Mr. Blackwood, I live in a 1-bedroom apartment and travel internationally 6 months of the year. I love those children, but uprooting them again after all they've been through." She hesitated. "They seem happy here, and your son, they've clearly bonded." Richard nodded. "Oliver's never had real friends before. Children who see him, not just his wheelchair." He paused. "I've filed for temporary emergency guardianship. It expires next week. I was going to request an extension, but what if we shared guardianship?" Catherine suggested suddenly. "I could visit regularly, take them occasionally when I'm stateside, but they'd have stability here, at least until—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Until their father is paroled," Richard completed grimly. Catherine's face paled. "You know, my legal team is thorough. The children don't know." She shook her head. "Ellie wanted to protect them from that shame. Matt was, charming but destructive. When he embezzled those funds, he tried to frame Ellie, nearly succeeded. Through the window, they watched as Emma helped Oliver throw bread to the koi in the garden pond, their faces alight with simple joy. Jack stood protectively nearby, but his posture was relaxed now, less vigilant. 8 months, Richard mused. A lot can happen in 8 months. Catherine studied him. "What are you planning?" Richard's expression remained neutral. "Nothing illegal, I assure you, but I protect what's mine, Miss Montgomery, and those children have become very important to my son." "And to you," she observed shrewdly. Richard didn't deny it. "I grew up with nothing, worked my way through MIT on scholarships and part-time jobs. I know what it's like to have potential but no opportunity, and you see that potential in Jack and Emma, don't you?" Catherine smiled sadly. "Ellie would have loved you. She always said education was the great equalizer." Outside, Emma had managed to coax Oliver out of his wheelchair onto a garden blanket, where she was teaching him to make daisy chains. The simple act, a child with nothing teaching a child who had everything, crystallized something in Richard's mind. "We have 8 months, he said with quiet determination. "Let's make them count." Jack Pierce, stared at his reflection in Wellington Academy's bathroom mirror, straightening his blue and gold uniform tie for the third time. 6 weeks at the Blackwood Mansion had transformed him physically. Proper nutrition had filled out his gaunt face, new haircut framing features that were beginning to lose their childish roundness. But the changes inside were more profound. "You okay?" Oliver asked from his wheelchair by the door. They'd be late for assembly if Jack didn't hurry. "Just nervous," Jack admitted. "Everyone here is so rich." Oliver smiled. "You get used to it. Besides, you're smarter than most of them." The placement tests had confirmed what Richard suspected. Both Pierce children were exceptional. Jack tested at a 10th grade math level despite missing months of formal education. Emma's linguistic abilities were equally remarkable. She spoke French fluently and was already picking up Spanish with astonishing speed. Wellington Academy had accepted both children on full scholarships, technically funded by Richard's charitable foundation, though no one needed to know that detail. "What if they find out about us? That we were homeless?" Jack whispered. Oliver shrugged. "My dad says everyone has a story. Yours is just more interesting than most." In the elementary wing, Emma faced similar first-day jitters, though she hid them better. Her new uniform dress and shiny shoes felt foreign after months of wearing the same tattered clothes. Miss Chen, her new teacher, had been briefed on her background and watched her with particular attention. "Class, we have a new student joining us today," Miss Chen announced. "This is Emma Pierce. Emma, would you like to tell us something about yourself?" Emma stood, her posture perfect. Another change from living at the Blackwood Mansion, where Richard's housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan, had gently coached both children on table manners and social graces. "I like languages and stories," Emma said simply, "and I'm happy to be here." A girl with glossy blonde hair raised her hand. "Where did you go to school before?" Emma hesitated. Richard and Catherine had prepared a cover story, but lying felt wrong. "I was homeschooled," she said finally. Technically true, if self-education in public libraries counted. At lunch, Emma sat with Oliver, both of them waiting for Jack, who had a different lunch period but had promised to stop by. The cafeteria buzzed with curious whispers about the newcomers living at the Blackwood Mansion. "Is it true, you're Richard Blackwood's secret daughter?" One bold 6th grader asked Emma. Before she could answer, Zachary Miller, the same boy from the playground incident, approached their table. "She's not," Zachary said flatly. "She's just some charity case his dad took in. I heard my parents talking. She was homeless before Blackwood found her, probably has lice." Oliver's face flushed with anger. "Shut up, Zachary." But Emma remained calm, meeting Zachary's gaze steadily. "I was homeless," she acknowledged, her voice carrying clearly enough that nearby tables fell silent. "My mother died, and my brother kept us safe until Mr. Blackwood helped us. I'm not ashamed of that." The cafeteria grew quieter still as Jack appeared, placing a protective hand on Emma's shoulder. "Problem here?" he asked, his eyes locked on Zachary. Zachary faltered under the combined stares of Jack, Emma, and Oliver. "Whatever," he mumbled, retreating. That evening, Richard found the 3 children in the library, huddled together as Jack recounted the cafeteria confrontation. "And then Emma just owned it," Jack was saying proudly. "You should have seen Zachary's face." Richard cleared his throat, and the children looked up guiltily. "Difficult first day?" Emma shook her head. "Not difficult. Just different." Richard sat with them, listening as they shared their experiences. Oliver had defended the Pierce siblings fiercely. Jack had aced his math placement test. Emma had impressed her French teacher, a native Parisian who couldn't believe she'd never had formal lessons. "I have something to show you," Richard said when they finished, leading them to his home office. A large world map covered one wall, with 3 different colored pins placed in various locations. "Blue for Jack, green for Emma, red for Oliver," he explained. "These are the places I think you might want to visit someday, based on your interests." Jack's blue pins marked NASA's Johnson Space Center, MIT, Silicon Valley. Emma's green pins highlighted Paris, Barcelona, Tokyo. Oliver's red pins indicated the world's greatest medical research centers, places pioneering treatments for his condition. "This is my promise to you," Richard said. "Work hard, dream big, and I'll help you reach these places. Not as tourists, but as scholars, researchers, or whatever you aspire to be." The children stared at the map, their eyes wide with possibilities they'd never considered before. Later, as Richard tucked Emma into bed, a ritual she still requested despite her growing independence, she asked the question that had lingered all day. "Why did you really help us, Mr. Richard?" Richard considered his answer carefully. "Because sometimes people come into our lives exactly when we need them most. You helped Oliver when he needed courage, and maybe he and I can help you and Jack when you need a safe place." Emma studied him with eyes too perceptive for her age. "But you're still sad sometimes." "I can tell." Richard smiled faintly. "That's very observant, Emma. Yes, I miss Oliver's mother. Some sadness never completely goes away." "Like with my mom," Emma nodded. "But it helps having people who understand." Richard gently tucked the blanket around her. Yes, it does." What he didn't say, couldn't yet say, was how much these children were healing something in him that he thought would stay broken forever after his wife's death, or how determined he was to protect them when their father eventually resurfaced. Some battles were for another day. The grandfather clock in the Blackwood Mansion's hallway struck midnight as Richard pored over legal documents in his study. 3 months had passed since Emma and Jack came into their lives. 3 months of transformation, growth, and an increasingly complicated legal situation. "The joint guardianship with Catherine Montgomery is solid," Harrison Porter assured him, passing another document for signature. "But if Matthew Pierce contests it upon release," Richard's jaw tightened. 5 more months until his parole hearing. "I want every angle covered." A soft knock interrupted them. Catherine Montgomery stood in the doorway, having arrived that evening for her monthly visit with the children. "Sorry to intrude," she said. "I couldn't sleep and saw the light." Richard gestured her in. "We're just reviewing options." "Adieu." Catherine took a seat, her diplomatic training evident in her composed demeanor despite the late hour. "Matt will fight for custody," she said bluntly, "not because he cares about the children, but because he'll see them as leverage." "Leverage for what?" Harrison asked. "Money, status, whatever he can extract." Catherine's voice held years of bitterness. "He charmed Ellie, then nearly destroyed her. He'll do the same to those children if given the chance." Richard's phone buzzed with a security alert. The smart home system showed movement in Oliver's wing. "Excuse me," he said, pulling up the security feed on his tablet. The night vision camera revealed Emma sleepwalking down the hallway, her face troubled. They had discovered her sleepwalking tendency during her 2nd week at the mansion. The doctor attributed it to trauma and grief, predicting she would outgrow it as she felt more secure. "I should go to her," Richard said, rising. "Let me," Catherine offered. "I'd like to be useful while I'm here." Richard hesitated, then nodded. As Catherine left, Harrison continued reviewing the legal strategy. "We've compiled extensive evidence of Pierce's unsuitability as a guardian, his criminal record, history of violence, gambling addiction." "And if that's not enough," Richard interrupted. Harrison looked uncomfortable. "There are other options, less conventional ones." "I'm not bribing judges, if that's what you're suggesting." "Of course not. But certain evidence about Pierce's prison behavior could surface. Contraband, fight participation, things that might delay parole." Richard shook his head. "We play this clean. The children have seen enough dishonesty." The door opened as Catherine returned, her expression troubled. "Emma was in Jack's room," she reported. "Apparently it's a regular occurrence. Jack says she comes most nights, checking that he's still there. Tonight she was talking in her sleep, something about Daddy coming to take us away." Richard frowned. I thought they believed their father was dead. Catherine sank into a chair. They do, which makes this more concerning. Emma's subconscious might be processing fears of separation differently. Or she knows something we don't, Harrison suggested. Impossible, Catherine said. Ellie was adamant about protecting them from the truth. Neither child has any memory of Matt. The divorce happened when Emma was just a year old. Richard stared thoughtfully at the family photo on his desk. Himself, Oliver, and his late wife Caroline. Taken 6 months before the aggressive cancer took her. Oliver had Emma's same tendency to be wise, beyond his years. Children sense more than we realize, he said quietly. Get the sleep study scheduled, Harrison. Let's make sure there's nothing physiological happening with Emma. The next morning, Richard found Jack alone in the kitchen, methodically cutting fruit for breakfast with a precision that spoke to his mathematical mind. Emma sleep okay after her wandering? Richard asked casually. Jack glanced up, his expression guarded. She doesn't remember it when she does that. But you do, every time. Jack nodded, returning to his careful fruit arrangement. She's worried about something, keeps saying he's coming in her sleep. Any idea who she means? Jack's knife paused mid-slice. Sometimes I think she remembers him. Our dad. Richard kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. Your father who died when Emma was a baby. That's what Mum told us. Jack's voice dropped to a whisper. But once I found old letters, Mum was crying over them. They were from jail, Richard, from our dad. Richard's heart raced. Did you tell Emma? Jack shook his head vehemently. Never. She was too little. I put the letters back and never mentioned it. He looked up, his eyes suddenly fierce with protective love. You won't send us away if he comes back, will you? The question hit Richard like a physical blow. Jack, no one is sending you anywhere. This is your home for as long as you want it to be. Before Jack could respond, Emma bounded into the kitchen, her sleepwalking episode apparently forgotten in the morning light. Aunt Catherine promised to take us to the aquarium today, she announced. Richard watched as Jack instantly shifted into Big Brother mode, his serious expression replaced by an easy smile. The boy had been carrying too many secrets, too many burdens, and now Richard carried them too. Later, as Catherine prepared to take the children out, Richard pulled her aside. We need to tell them the truth about their father. Soon. Catherine's face paled. Richard, it would devastate them. Jack already suspects. And Emma's subconscious is processing something. Better they hear it from us than discover it when he suddenly appears. Catherine nodded reluctantly. After the holidays, let them have one happy Christmas first. Richard agreed, but as he watched the children leave with Catherine, a sense of foreboding settled over him. Matthew Pierce's shadow was lengthening over their carefully constructed peace, and Richard feared the coming storm would test all of them in ways none could predict, especially Emma, whose nighttime fears suggested she remembered more than anyone realized. Snow fell softly outside the Blackwood mansion as Christmas music played throughout the decorated halls. 4 months had passed since the Pierce children came into their lives, and the transformation was remarkable. Jack excelled at Wellington Academy, particularly in advanced mathematics and computer science. Emma had become fluent in Spanish alongside her French, and her reading level surpassed most 4th graders, despite her young age. Oliver, too, had changed. His new physical therapy regimen had strengthened his upper body significantly. He still needed his wheelchair, but could now transfer himself independently, a freedom that brought him immense pride. In the grand living room, Emma directed their Christmas decorating with surprising authority for a 6-year-old. The star goes on last, Oliver, she instructed as Oliver held the ornament impatiently. It's tradition. Richard watched from the doorway, a bittersweet smile on his face. His late wife Caroline had been equally particular about Christmas traditions. This was their 2nd Christmas without her, but the first that actually felt joyful again. "Dad!" Oliver called, spotting him. "Emma says we have to hang stockings for everybody. Do we have enough?" "I believe Mrs. Sullivan ordered extras," Richard replied, entering the room, "and Aunt Catherine arrives tomorrow for Christmas Eve." Jack looked up from where he was carefully arranging pine cones on the mantel. "Will she stay through New Year's this time?" "Until January 3rd, Richard confirmed. The truth about Matthew Pierce still remained unspoken. Catherine had convinced Richard to wait until after the holidays, arguing that the children deserved one untroubled Christmas. Richard had reluctantly agreed, though the knowledge weighed heavily on him, especially after discovering that Matthew Pierce had been moved to minimum security, a step that typically preceded early release. Later that evening, as the children watched a Christmas movie, Richard's phone rang. The caller ID displayed Blackwood Investigations, the discreet security firm he'd hired to monitor Matthew Pierce. "Excuse me," he murmured, stepping into his study and closing the door. "Blackwood." "Sir, we have a situation," the investigator reported. "Pierce had a disciplinary hearing today after contraband was found in his cell. His parole date has been pushed back by 3 months. Relief flooded through Richard, followed immediately by guilt. He hadn't authorized any interference, but the timing seemed suspicious. What kind of contraband? Prescription drugs, not his. Claims they were planted. Richard frowned. Were they? Not by us, sir. We're strictly observation, but Pierce has made enemies inside. Word is, he borrowed heavily from some dangerous people, promised to pay upon release. This aligned with Catherine's assessment of her former brother-in-law. Matthew Pierce was a manipulator who left destruction in his wake. The thought of such a man gaining access to Emma and Jack made Richard's blood run cold. "Maintain surveillance," Richard instructed, "and increase security here, discreetly." The next morning, Christmas Eve, Catherine arrived bearing gifts and news, while the children were occupied with holiday baking alongside Mrs. Sullivan. She and Richard convened in his study. "The State Department has offered me a position at the embassy in London," she announced without preamble. 2-year minimum commitment, beginning in February. Richard absorbed this information. "Congratulations. But what about the children? That's why I'm telling you now. The joint guardianship worked because I could visit regularly from London." She spread her hands helplessly. "You could petition to make me sole guardian," Richard suggested. Catherine shook her head. "Matt would contest it immediately. My status as blood relative gives our arrangement legitimacy. Without me." She hesitated. "There is another option. You could adopt them." The suggestion hung in the air between them, weighty with implications. Richard had considered this possibility privately, but hadn't voiced it. "Matt would fight that even harder," Richard pointed out. "Yes, but adoption proceedings would require his fitness as a parent to be evaluated. His criminal record, his abandonment, it would all become relevant. And if the children themselves expressed a preference—" "They're too young for the courts to give much weight to their wishes," Richard countered, though the idea had taken hold in his mind. "Besides, they don't even know Matt is alive." Catherine's expression turned resolute. "Then it's time they learned the truth. After Christmas, I'll help you tell them." Their conversation was interrupted by the study door bursting open as Emma ran in, flour dusting her cheeks. "Aunt Catherine! We made gingerbread men that look like everyone. Come see!" She grabbed her aunt's hand, pulling her toward the door, then paused, noticing the serious expressions. "Is everything okay?" "Just grown-up talk," Richard assured her with a smile. "Nothing important." Emma's perceptive gaze lingered on him. "You're worried about something, I can tell." Richard marveled again at her emotional intelligence. "Just work things, Emma. Nothing for you to worry about." But as Emma led Catherine away, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that their carefully constructed world was on the brink of significant change. The next few months would determine whether the fragile family they'd created could withstand the storm approaching in the form of Matthew Pierce. Christmas morning arrived with fresh snow and excited children. For a few precious hours, Richard allowed himself to set aside his concerns and simply enjoy the delight on 3 young faces as they opened gifts, ate cinnamon rolls, and reveled in the simple joy of belonging. Oliver received the latest adaptive gaming system. Jack unwrapped a telescope and advanced coding books. Emma's face lit up at new language learning programs and a collection of classic children's literature. "This is the best Christmas ever," Emma declared, looking around at her newfound family with shining eyes. Richard desperately hoped it wouldn't be their last together. Valentine's Day decorations adorned Wellington Academy as Emma carefully placed her handmade cards into her classmates' decorated bags. 5 months had passed since she and Jack had come to live with the Blackwoods. 5 months of security, education, and growing attachment to Oliver and Richard. "Those are really pretty, Emma," Oliver commented from his wheelchair beside her desk. His own Valentine cards were store-bought. His fine motor skills still limited his artistic abilities, but he dictated personal messages for Mrs. Sullivan to write in each one. "Thanks," Emma replied. "I made a special one for your dad, too." And for Jack and Aunt Catherine. Aunt Catherine had left for London 2 weeks earlier. The night before her departure, she and Richard had finally told the children the truth about their father, that Matthew Pierce was alive, in prison, and potentially seeking custody upon his release in April. Jack had taken the news with stunned silence, then anger, not at Richard and Catherine for the deception, but at their mother for the lie, and at the father who had abandoned them. Emma's reaction had been more complex. She'd cried, confused by emotions she couldn't fully articulate. Since then, her sleepwalking had increased, despite the sleep study showing no physical cause. "Dad says we're going to court next month," Oliver said quietly as they finished with their Valentines. "About adoption." Emma nodded. Richard had been incredibly transparent with all 3 children after the truth about Matthew emerged. He'd explained the legal process, the possible outcomes, and his determination to keep them together. He'd also made it clear that while he wanted to adopt Jack and Emma, the choice was ultimately theirs. "Jack says we should change our last names to Blackwood," Emma confided, "but I don't know if that would make my mom sad." Oliver considered this with the seriousness he brought to all conversations. "My mom died when I was 4. Dad says she lives in my heart now. Maybe your mom would be happy if you were happy." Emma smiled at this wisdom. "Maybe." Their conversation was interrupted as Zachary Miller approached, flanked by his usual followers. Since the cafeteria confrontation months earlier, he had mostly avoided them, but today he carried a valentine that he thrust toward Emma. "My mom made me give one to everyone," he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Emma accepted it with polite thanks. As Zachary walked away, she glanced inside the card. Her expression changed subtly before she tucked it into her desk. "What did it say?" Oliver asked. "Nothing important," Emma replied, but her cheerfulness seemed forced for the remainder of the day. That evening, Richard noticed Emma's unusual quietness during dinner. While Jack enthusiastically described his science project on satellite communication, Emma pushed food around her plate, responding only when directly addressed. After the children were in bed, Richard found the valentine from Zachary while checking Emma's backpack for school notices, something he did routinely for all 3 children. The message inside made his blood boil. "My dad says your real dad is getting out of jail soon, and you'll have to leave. Good riddance, charity case." Richard immediately called Wellington's headmaster at home, his voice tightly controlled as he explained the situation. By morning, Zachary would face disciplinary action, and a meeting with his parents would be scheduled, but the damage was already done. The information about Matthew Pierce's potential release had somehow leaked beyond their trusted circle. The next morning, Richard arranged for all three children to stay home from school. After breakfast, he gathered them in the family room. "I need to talk to you about something important," he began. "It seems that information about your father's situation has become known at school." Jack's expression hardened. "Zachary's Valentine to Emma." Richard nodded. "I've spoken with the headmaster. But more importantly, I want to be completely honest with you about what's happening." He explained that Matthew Pierce's parole hearing was scheduled for April 15th. If granted parole, he could potentially seek custody. However, Richard had already filed adoption papers, and their first family court appearance was scheduled for March 10th. "What happens if the judge says no?" Jack asked, the mathematical precision of his mind always calculating probabilities. "Then we appeal," Richard answered firmly. "I have the best legal team in Massachusetts. But I need you both to understand something." He looked directly at Emma and Jack. "No matter what happens in court, you will never be homeless again. You will never be separated. I promise you that." Emma, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, finally spoke. "But what if our real dad wants us back? What if he's sorry?" The question revealed the complex emotions of a child who had never known her father, who had been told he was dead, and who now faced the possibility of meeting him. Richard chose his words carefully. "People can change, Emma. And if your father has truly changed and wants what's best for you both, then we'll figure things out together. But my priority, my only priority, is keeping you safe and happy." Jack put his arm around his sister protectively. "We belong here now, Em, with Oliver and Richard." Oliver, who had been listening intently, wheeled himself closer to Emma. "Dad always says family is about love, not just blood. You and Jack are our family now." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I know, I keep having these dreams about a man taking us away." Richard knelt before her. "Those are just dreams, Emma, and I promise you no one is taking you anywhere you don't want to go." Later that day, as fresh snow fell outside, Richard watched the three children building an elaborate snow fort in the garden, their morning fears temporarily forgotten in play. His phone buzzed with a text from Harrison Porter. Pierce requesting early parole hearing, citing family reunification as reason. The battle was beginning sooner than expected, and Richard steeled himself for what was to come. The children's laughter echoed through the garden, a sound that had become precious to him, a sound he would fight with every resource at his command to preserve. The Boston family court building loomed imposingly as Richard parked his Tesla in the reserved space. 6 months had passed since Emma helped Oliver down the slide. 6 months of healing, growth, and family bonding. Now, on March 10th, they faced their first adoption hearing. "Everyone remember what we discussed?" Richard asked, glancing at the three children in the back seat. All wore their best clothes, Jack and Oliver in small suits, Emma in a navy blue dress that Catherine had sent from London. They nodded solemnly. The past week had been filled with preparatory discussions with Richard's legal team. The children understood they would speak with the judge privately, answering questions about their wishes and feelings. "Just tell the truth," Richard had emphasized repeatedly. "That's all anyone expects." Inside, they were directed to a private waiting room, where Harrison Porter and 2 other attorneys from Richard's legal team reviewed last-minute details. The court-appointed guardian ad litem, a woman named Ms. Reynolds, who had visited the Blackwood home twice to evaluate the children's living situation, joined them briefly. "The children seem well-adjusted and bonded to you, Mr. Blackwood," she commented. "My report reflects that. However, I should warn you that Mr. Pierce has submitted a statement objecting to the adoption." Richard's jaw tightened. "From prison? He hasn't seen these children in 5 years." Ms. Reynolds nodded sympathetically. The court must consider all parental objections, but given the circumstances. She left the implication hanging. Matthew Pierce's criminal record and abandonment would weigh heavily against him. When their case was called, Richard squeezed each child's hand reassuringly before they followed Ms. Reynolds to the judge's chambers for their private conversation. Judge Evelyn Harding, a stern-faced woman with kind eyes, welcomed the children warmly, explaining that they could speak freely without fear of upsetting anyone. "I understand you've been living with Mr. Blackwood for 6 months now," she began. "How do you like it there?" Jack, as the oldest, answered first. "It's the best home we've ever had. Richard helps me with advanced math. We have our own rooms. We're never hungry." Judge Harding nodded. "And you, Oliver? How do you feel about sharing your home and father?" Oliver smiled. "Jack and Emma are the best thing that ever happened to us. Emma helps me be brave. Jack teaches me cool science stuff. They're like the brother and sister I always wanted." The judge turned finally to Emma, whose small hands were folded neatly in her lap. "And what about you, Emma? Do you want Mr. Blackwood to adopt you and Jack?" Emma nodded, then hesitated. "Can I ask a question, Your Honor?" "Of course. If our real dad comes back, will we have to go with him, even if we don't want to?" Judge Harding considered the question carefully. "The court always considers what's best for children. That includes your wishes, especially as you get older, but it also includes many other factors. Our mom told us he was dead," Emma said quietly. "Why would she lie if he was a good dad?" The judge had clearly reviewed the case file thoroughly. "Sometimes adults make mistakes, Emma. Even parents. Your mother might have thought she was protecting you." "Richard never lies to us," Jack interjected firmly. "He promised we'd stay together, and he keeps his promises." After 20 minutes of conversation, the children rejoined Richard in the courtroom. The proceedings continued with testimony from Ms. Reynolds, Richard's character witnesses, including Oliver's doctors, who spoke of the remarkable improvement in his condition since the Pierce children arrived, and finally, Richard himself. Under gentle questioning from Harrison, Richard articulated his desire to provide a permanent home for Jack and Emma. "These children have enriched our lives immeasurably," he concluded. "My son has blossomed with their friendship, and I've found purpose in helping them reach their potential." The district attorney appointed to represent Matthew Pierce's interests cross-examined Richard briefly, focusing on his motivation and the children's continued relationship with their Aunt Catherine. "Ms. Montgomery supports the adoption fully," Richard explained. "She remains in their lives as their aunt, which would continue regardless of the adoption's outcome." Finally, Judge Harding addressed the courtroom. "This is a preliminary hearing to establish facts and hear initial testimony. Given the objection from the children's biological father, I'm ordering a full home study and psychological evaluation to be completed before our next hearing on May 12th. In the meantime, the temporary joint guardianship between Mr. Blackwood and Ms. Montgomery remains in effect." She looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Blackwood, while your petition shows promise, the court must consider all factors before terminating parental rights. Mr. Pierce will have opportunity to present his case after his release." Richard nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the disappointment churning inside him. May 12th was nearly a month after Matthew Pierce's scheduled parole hearing. The timing couldn't be worse. Outside the courthouse, as spring rain fell gently, Jack voiced the fear all of them felt. "What if he gets out and comes for us before the next hearing?" Richard knelt to eye level with all 3 children. "He would have to go through me first, and I promise you that won't happen easily." That evening, after the children were asleep, Richard sat alone in his study, reviewing Matthew Pierce's prison file. Obtained through channels that Harrison preferred not to discuss, the pattern was clear: manipulation, charm when needed, violence when cornered. A classic narcissist who viewed his children as possessions rather than people. Richard's phone rang, displaying Catherine's London number. "How did it go?" she asked without preamble. "About as expected. Next hearing May 12th. Pierce's parole hearing is April 15th. Catherine's sigh crackled over the international connection. "I've applied for emergency leave to testify at both." "You should know," Richard said carefully. "Pierce has been making calls from prison to a lawyer specializing in sensational custody cases. He's planning to fight publicly," Catherine translated. "Use the billionaire stealing children narrative to gain sympathy." "Precisely." "Richard," Catherine's voice turned serious, "be prepared for ugliness. Matt excels at finding weaknesses and exploiting them. He'll dig into your past, your business practices, everything." "Let him try," Richard replied, his voice hardening. "I've got nothing to hide and everything to fight for." As he hung up, Richard gazed at the family photo on his desk, now updated to include Jack and Emma alongside himself and Oliver. Whatever storm Matthew Pierce brought, Richard would weather it. The alternative, losing these children who had become as dear to him as his own son, was unthinkable. For the first time in his life, Richard Blackwood faced an adversary he couldn't simply outspend or outmaneuver. This battle would test not just his resources, but his character. And losing was not an option. April in Boston brought blooming cherry trees to the Blackwood estate and increasing anxiety as Matthew Pierce's parole hearing approached. 7 months had passed since Emma's brave intervention on the playground. 7 months that had transformed all their lives. Jack now assisted in Richard's home office on weekends, showing remarkable aptitude for coding and financial models despite being only 9. Emma had started ballet lessons, a childhood dream her mother could never afford, and performed with a grace that belied her 6 years. Oliver's physical therapy had progressed to the point where he could stand with support for short periods, a breakthrough that had seemed impossible before. They had become a family in every way that mattered. And now they faced the threat of it all unraveling. Richard's security team had doubled, with discreet guards patrolling the property perimeter. The children's school had been briefed about potential custody issues, with strict instructions about who could and couldn't pick them up. Richard found himself checking the security cameras obsessively, jumping whenever his phone rang with unknown numbers. On April 14th, the day before Matthew Pierce's parole hearing, Richard received a call from Harrison Porter. "We've got a problem," Harrison said without preamble. "Pierce has hired Gloria Winters." Richard recognized the name immediately. A flamboyant attorney known for representing underdogs against the wealthy and powerful. She specialized in family reunification cases with heavy media coverage. "She's already scheduling interviews," Harrison continued. "Playing the redemption angle hard, repentant father seeking reunion with children stolen by billionaire." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. He hasn't seen those children in 5 years, hasn't supported them for even longer. "Facts rarely matter in the court of public opinion. We need to get ahead of this." Richard thought quickly. "Schedule a press conference. Tomorrow, after the parole hearing. We reveal the adoption petition first, on our terms, emphasize the children's stability, their progress, focus on their months of homelessness after their mother died, before I found them. And if reporters ask about Pierce's claims, that you're using your wealth to separate a father from his children, then I remind them that these children believed their father was dead until 2 months ago, because that's what their mother told them to protect them from the truth." As Richard hung up, he noticed Emma standing in the doorway, her ballet bag clutched in her small hands. Her expression told him she'd heard enough to understand. "Is my real dad going to take us away?" she asked, her voice small. Richard knelt to her level. "No, Emma. I won't let that happen." "But he wants to. He's trying to." Richard nodded, never lying to her. "He's going to try, but remember what I promised. No one will take you anywhere you don't want to go. Emma's chin trembled. "I have dreams about him. A man I don't remember, but he's scary in my dreams. He shouts and breaks things." Richard's heart clenched. Despite Eleanor Pierce's efforts to shield her children, Emma retained subconscious memories of her father's volatility. "Dreams can't hurt you, Emma." "But he could," she whispered. Richard gathered her into his arms, holding her close. "Listen to me. You, Jack, and Oliver are the most important people in my life. I would do anything, anything to keep you safe. Do you understand?" Emma nodded against his shoulder. "Jack says you have more money than anyone. And money means power." "Sometimes," Richard acknowledged, "but what's more powerful is love and family and truth." That night, all three children insisted on sleeping in Oliver's room, Jack on a roll-away bed, Emma in a nest of blankets on the floor. Richard didn't have the heart to separate them, understanding their need to draw strength from each other on this anxious night. Long after they fell asleep, Richard stood in the doorway watching them. In 7 months, these three children had formed bonds that many siblings never achieved in a lifetime. Oliver's condition had taught him empathy beyond his years. Jack's years protecting Emma had given him wisdom and responsibility no child should need. And Emma, bright, perceptive Emma, held them all together with her fierce, unwavering love. Richard's phone vibrated with a text from Catherine. "Landed in Boston, coming directly to hearing tomorrow, bringing all documentation about Matt's abuse." This gave Richard some comfort. Catherine's testimony about Matthew's behavior during his marriage to Eleanor would be powerful. But Matthew had a narrative too, the repentant father who had served his time and wanted to reconnect with his children. The media would eat it up. The next morning brought news that shattered their fragile equilibrium. Matthew Pierce had been granted parole, effective immediately. Richard received the call as he prepared the children for school. Harrison's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Pierce was released last night, paperwork expedited somehow. He's already given a breakfast interview to Channel 7, claiming you've brainwashed his children and bought off the system." "Where is he now?" Richard demanded, motioning for Mrs. Sullivan to keep the children in the kitchen. "Unknown, but his attorney is holding a press conference at 10. They're demanding immediate visitation with the children." Richard made a swift decision. "Pull the children from school today, contact Judge Harding's office. We need an emergency hearing regarding visitation and double security here. No one gets past the gate without my explicit approval." As he ended the call, Richard composed himself before entering the kitchen, where three young faces looked up at him expectantly. He couldn't shield them from reality any longer. "Children, there's been a change of plans today. You won't be going to school." Jack immediately understood. "He's out, isn't he? Our father." Richard nodded, watching as Jack instinctively moved closer to Emma. "Yes, he was released last night. We're taking precautions to ensure everyone's safety." Oliver looked confused. "Dad, you said we'd be safe." "And you will be," Richard assured him. "But today, we stay home together. Harrison is arranging for Judge Harding to see us about visitation rules." Emma's small face had gone pale. "Does he know where we live?" The question cut through Richard like a knife. "The address is private, Emma, and we have excellent security." But as he spoke, a notification appeared on his phone. Reporters gathering at the front gate, cameras rolling. Someone had leaked their location. The battle for Jack and Emma Pierce had begun in earnest, and Richard suddenly feared that all his wealth and power might not be enough to protect them from the storm breaking over their newfound family. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as Richard guided the children through a side entrance, flanked by security. 8 months had passed since Emma's brave act on the playground, and now they faced their greatest challenge, Matthew Pierce's demand for immediate, unsupervised visitation with his children. Inside Judge Harding's chambers, the atmosphere was tense. Matthew Pierce sat opposite them, dressed in a suit that couldn't quite disguise his prison physicality. When Jack and Emma entered, his face lit up with practiced emotion. "My babies," he whispered, half rising before his attorney, Gloria Winters, placed a restraining hand on his arm. Emma shrank against Richard's side while Jack stood protectively in front of his sister, his young face set in a hard mask. "We'll speak with the children separately," Judge Harding announced. "But first, I want to understand the urgency of this hearing." Gloria Winters launched into an impassioned speech about a father's rights, rehabilitation, and the unconscionable influence of wealth separating a family. Harrison Porter countered with facts about Matthew's abandonment, the children's belief he was dead, and their remarkable progress in the Blackwood home. "The children need stability," Harrison emphasized. "Any visitation should be supervised and gradually implemented." Matthew Pierce leaned forward. "Your Honor, they're my children. This man has had them for 8 months. I've lost 5 years already." "Years you lost due to criminal activity," Catherine Montgomery interjected sharply from beside Richard. Her diplomatic reserve had cracked at the sight of her former brother-in-law. Judge Harding silenced them all with a raised hand. "Mr. Pierce, while I appreciate your desire to reconnect with your children, their welfare is my primary concern. I'm ordering a psychological evaluation of all parties before making any visitation determination." Matthew's face darkened momentarily before he composed himself. "Of course, Your Honor. Whatever serves my children best." After the hearing, Richard hustled the children toward their waiting car, but Matthew intercepted them in the corridor. "Jack, Emma," he called softly, "don't you remember me at all?" Emma hid her face against Richard's suit jacket. Jack faced his biological father squarely. "Mom said you were dead." Pain, real or expertly feigned, crossed Matthew's features. "She was angry at me. I made mistakes, but I never stopped loving you." "Mr. Pierce," Richard intervened. "The judge ordered no contact until evaluations are complete." Matthew's eyes hardened as they met Richard's. "You can't buy everything, Blackwood. Some things are beyond price." "Like responsibility, honesty. Where were those values when you abandoned your family?" Richard countered, his voice low but intense. Gloria Winters appeared, pulling Matthew away. "This isn't helping your case, Matt," she murmured, but her sharp glance at Richard conveyed the real message. The battle had just begun. Outside, reporters swarmed their car. Richard kept the children's heads down, refusing to comment as they pushed through the crowd. Only when they were safely driving away did he exhale. "He doesn't seem scary," Emma said quietly from the back seat. "Not like in my dreams." Catherine turned from the front passenger seat. "Appearances can be deceiving, sweetheart. Your mother had reasons for what she told you." "Is he going to take us away?" Jack asked, the question that had haunted them all for months. Richard met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "No, but we have to follow the legal process." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Richard and Catherine sat in his study reviewing strategy with Harrison. "Pierce has hired a private investigator," Harrison reported grimly. "They're digging for anything to discredit you. Business rivals, disgruntled employees, past relationships." "Let them dig," Richard said wearily. "My concern is the children. That judge saw through Pierce's performance, right?" Catherine nodded. "Mostly, but he's always been charming when it serves him, and he seemed different. More controlled than I remember." "Prison changes people," Harrison observed. "Sometimes for better, sometimes they just learn to hide their true nature more effectively." Richard's phone chimed with a security alert. The camera showed Emma sleepwalking again, moving purposefully down the hallway toward the stairs. He rushed to intercept her, gathering her small form gently into his arms. "No, please don't," she murmured in her sleep. "Don't take us." "Shh," Richard soothed, carrying her back to bed. "No one's taking you anywhere." As Emma settled back into peaceful sleep, Richard made a silent vow. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, he would protect these children, even if it meant confronting the demons from Matthew Pierce's past that Eleanor had tried so desperately to bury. The psychological evaluations took 3 grueling weeks. Richard watched helplessly as the children were questioned repeatedly about their feelings toward both father figures in their lives. Throughout April, Matthew Pierce's redemption narrative dominated local media, the reformed ex-convict fighting a billionaire for his children. On May 1st, 9 months after Emma first helped Oliver down the slide, the 4 of them sat in the garden, enjoying rare spring warmth. Oliver demonstrated his progress, standing between parallel bars installed by his physical therapist. "Look, Emma, 10 seconds!" he announced proudly, his legs trembling with effort before he lowered himself back into his wheelchair. Emma applauded enthusiastically. "Soon you'll stand long enough to hug me properly." Richard watched from the terrace, his phone never far from reach. The court-appointed psychologist's report was due today, and its contents would significantly influence Judge Harding's decision about visitation. Harrison Porter's call came as the children were racing remote-controlled cars across the lawn. Jack and Emma had built Oliver's controller with special adaptations for his limited dexterity. "The report is mixed," Harrison reported without preamble. "Dr. Lowell acknowledges the children's strong attachment to you and concerns about disrupting their stability. However, she's also influenced by Pierce's apparent reformation and his right to rebuild his relationship with his biological children." Richard's stomach tightened. Bottom line. She's recommending supervised visitation, twice weekly, increasing to unsupervised if all goes well. The news hit Richard like a physical blow. Supervised visitation was the best they could have hoped for realistically, but the prospect of unsupervised time with Matthew terrified him. "When?" "First visit scheduled for Saturday. 2 hours at the Family Services Center. You're permitted to be present but not in the same room." Richard ended the call and looked at the playing children, dreading having to disrupt their happiness with this news. Catherine, visiting from London for the upcoming adoption hearing, joined him on the terrace. "They need to know," she said gently, reading his expression, "better coming from us than sprung on them." That evening, Richard gathered everyone in the family room. The children sensed the seriousness of the conversation. Even Emma sat unusually still. "The judge has made a decision about your father," Richard began carefully. "You'll be seeing him this Saturday at a special center with counselors present." Jack's face darkened. "I don't want to go." "Do we have to?" Emma whispered, instinctively moving closer to Oliver. "I'm afraid so," Richard answered honestly. "The court believes it's important for you to know your biological father." "You're our real father," Jack declared fiercely. "Not him." Richard felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I feel that way too, Jack. But legally, the situation is complicated." "Will you be there?" Emma asked. "I'll be in the building the entire time," Richard promised, "and we'll go for ice cream after, just the 4 of us." The days before Saturday passed with increasing tension. Jack became withdrawn, spending hours coding complex programs that Richard suspected were a way to control something in his uncertain world. Emma's sleepwalking increased, requiring Richard to install additional motion sensors throughout the house. Saturday morning arrived, with driving rain that matched their mood. As they drove to the Family Services Center, Emma clutched her favorite book, a gift from Richard, refusing to leave it behind. "Sweetheart, you probably can't take that in," Catherine explained from the front seat. She'd insisted on accompanying them for moral support. "It's my talisman," Emma replied with surprising vocabulary for a 6-year-old. "For courage." The Family Services Center was a bland building with cheerful posters that failed to disguise its institutional nature. Matthew Pierce waited in the visitation room, supervised by Dr. Lowell and a court-appointed monitor. As the children prepared to enter, Richard knelt before them. Remember, I'm right outside. 2 hours, that's all. You're safe here." Jack nodded stoically, taking his sister's hand. Emma looked back at Richard, her small face solemn. "We'll be brave," she promised. Richard and Catherine watched through the observation window as the children entered the room. Matthew rose, tears in his eyes. Whether genuine or calculated was impossible to determine. "They look so much like Eleanor," Catherine whispered. For 2 excruciating hours, Richard observed as Matthew attempted to connect with his children. Jack remained guarded, answering questions minimally. Emma was politely distant, clutching her book throughout. Matthew showed them photos of a modest apartment he'd rented, explaining that he was working as an accounting clerk and attending regular counseling. When the session ended, the children rushed to Richard as if they'd been separated for days rather than hours. Matthew watched, his expression unreadable, as Richard embraced them both. "Mr. Blackwood," Matthew said, approaching with Dr. Lowell beside him, "I want to thank you for taking care of my children when they needed help." Richard straightened, keeping one hand on each child's shoulder. They're remarkable children, a credit to their mother's memory. A flash of something, anger, resentment, crossed Matthew's face before he smiled tightly. "Yes, Eleanor did her best. I look forward to our next visit." As they left, Richard couldn't shake the feeling that Matthew Pierce's cooperative facade concealed far darker intentions. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles reflecting a sky still heavy with clouds, much like the atmosphere surrounding their fragile family. 2 weeks of supervised visitations left the Pierce children increasingly anxious. Jack became hyper-vigilant, checking window locks before bed and researching Massachusetts custody laws on Richard's tablet. Emma's nightmares intensified. She frequently woke screaming about a man taking them away. Richard documented everything: emotional changes, concerning comments the children made about their visits, the subtle pressure Matthew applied about their real home waiting for them. On May 12th, 10 months after their lives intersected, they returned to court for the adoption hearing. Matthew Pierce sat with Gloria Winters, his appearance now that of a respectable businessman rather than an ex-convict. Judge Harding reviewed the extensive documentation from both sides. Dr. Lowell testified about the children's conflicted loyalties, but acknowledged their primary attachment remained with Richard and Oliver. "The supervised visitations have proceeded without incident," she noted, "though the children remain hesitant. Mr. Pierce has demonstrated appropriate boundaries and genuine interest in reconnecting." Gloria Winters called Matthew to testify. He spoke compellingly about his rehabilitation, his deep remorse, and his desire to be the father his children deserved. "I made terrible mistakes," he admitted, his voice breaking strategically. "I lost 5 years with my children that I can never get back. I'm not asking to remove them from Mr. Blackwood's life. I recognize the bond they've formed. I'm simply asking for the chance to be their father again." Harrison Porter's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Pierce, when was the last time you provided financial support for your children before their mother died?" Matthew shifted uncomfortably. "My circumstances made that impossible." "Your circumstances being prison," Harrison clarified. "And before prison? Records show no child support payments for 2 years prior to your incarceration." Gloria objected, but the point was made. Harrison continued methodically exposing the gaps in Matthew's parental history, his pattern of broken promises, and inconsistencies in his testimony. When Richard took the stand, he spoke not of his resources or the advantages he could provide, but of the children themselves, Jack's brilliance with computers, Emma's linguistic gifts, their resilience and courage. "These children have become as precious to me as my own son," he testified. "They deserve stability, consistency, and unconditional love, which I'm fully prepared to provide for the rest of their lives." Gloria's cross-examination focused on Richard's wealth and privilege. "Isn't it true, Mr. Blackwood, that you're accustomed to acquiring whatever you want, that these children are simply your latest acquisition?" Richard's expression hardened. "Miss Winters, I grew up in poverty. Everything I have, I built. I understand better than most the difference between possessions and people. Jack and Emma aren't acquisitions. They're children who needed a home when they had nowhere else to go." The final witnesses were Jack and Emma themselves. Judge Harding questioned them gently in her chambers. "Jack, you're old enough to have your wishes considered carefully," she explained. "Where do you want to live permanently?" Jack didn't hesitate. "With Richard and Oliver. They're our family now." "And your father, Matthew?" Jack's expression clouded. "He says things when the supervisors aren't listening, about taking us away, about making Richard pay." Judge Harding's eyebrows rose. "Can you give me an example?" "Last visit, when Dr. Lowell stepped out, he told Emma that soon we'd be living with him and wouldn't need to remember Richard's phone number anymore." Emma nodded confirmation, her small face serious. "He said Richard only wants us because Oliver is broken and needs friends." Judge Harding made notes before asking, "And what do you want, Emma?" "I want to stay with Richard forever. I want Oliver to be my brother for real." She hesitated. "My real daddy scares me in my dreams. I think I remember him from before, but not with my eyes, with my feelings." After the children returned to the courtroom, Judge Harding announced she needed time to consider all testimony before ruling on the adoption petition. In the meantime, the current guardianship arrangement continues, as do the supervised visitations. Outside the courthouse, Catherine pulled Richard aside while the children waited with security. "Something's wrong. Matthew's too confident, too composed. The old Matt would have lost his temper during Harrison's questioning." Richard nodded grimly. "He's planning something." "Be careful," Catherine warned. "When Matt can't get what he wants legitimately, he finds other ways." That night, Richard installed additional security cameras and hired overnight guards. The adoption proceedings had revealed Matthew's true character beneath his reformed facade, but Richard feared the legal system moved too slowly to protect Jack and Emma from whatever their father might be planning. In the darkness of her bedroom, Emma whispered to her brother through their secret walkie-talkies, "I remember things sometimes, Jack." "About him, bad things." "I know, Em," Jack replied, the static unable to disguise the worry in his voice. "But Richard won't let anything happen to us, and I won't either." The next 2 weeks brought increasing tension as supervised visitations continued. Matthew Pierce maintained his cooperative facade, but Richard noted subtle changes in the children after each visit. Emma more withdrawn, Jack more vigilant. During the 4th visitation, 11 months after the playground incident, something changed. Matthew arrived with a gift for each child, a high-end coding tablet for Jack and an expensive French language program for Emma. The presents were carefully chosen to appeal to each child's interests, demonstrating more knowledge about them than he should have had from their limited interactions. "He knew about my coding project," Jack reported to Richard afterward, his expression troubled. "The specific one I'm working on with MIT's youth program. I never told him about that." Richard's security team discovered the breach that evening. Matthew had hired a private investigator who'd gained access to Wellington Academy's records through a clerical employee. The investigator had been photographing the children's academic files, extracurricular activities, and psychological assessments. Richard immediately informed Judge Harding, who ordered an emergency hearing. Matthew and Gloria Winters arrived looking unconcerned. "My client has every right to learn about his children's education and development," Gloria argued. The information accessed was not confidential under family court guidelines. The method of access was inappropriate and potentially illegal," Harrison countered. "This demonstrates Mr. Pierce's willingness to circumvent proper channels and court orders." Judge Harding's expression was severe as she addressed Matthew directly. "Mr. Pierce, while I understand your desire to know your children better, employing private investigators to access school records shows concerning judgment. I'm ordering a temporary suspension of visitation pending investigation of this incident." Outside the courtroom, Matthew's calm facade cracked momentarily. "This isn't over, Blackwood," he muttered as they passed in the hallway. "You can't keep my children forever." Richard maintained his composure until they were safely home, where he immediately called an emergency meeting with his security team and legal advisors. "He's escalating," Harrison observed grimly. The adoption hearing didn't go as he'd planned. He expected Judge Harding to be swayed by his Reformation narrative. "What's his next move?" Richard demanded. "Best case, he continues legal challenges, drags out proceedings, tries to exhaust our resources. And worst case?" Harrison exchanged glances with the head of security. "He attempts to take matters into his own hands." That evening, Richard found Jack in the Home Office, methodically working through security footage from Wellington Academy. "What are you doing?" Richard asked gently. "Looking for the PI," Jack replied without looking up. "I want to see his face, know who to watch for." Richard placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "That's not your job, son. It's mine to keep you safe." Jack finally looked up, his eyes too old for his 9 years. "Before you found us, keeping Emma safe was my only job. I can't just stop." Richard pulled up a chair beside him. "I understand, but you deserve to be a child again, Jack. To play, learn, grow, without constant vigilance. What if he tries to take us? Then he'll have to get through me, my security team, the police, and Judge Harding's court order. That's not going to happen." Jack seemed unconvinced, but allowed Richard to guide him away from the computer and toward the kitchen where Mrs. Sullivan had prepared his favorite dinner. Throughout the meal, Richard noticed how Jack positioned himself to keep Emma in his sightline, how he surveyed the room periodically, how he startled at unexpected sounds. Later, Richard found Emma in the library, carefully practicing her French pronunciation with a recording. "Comment vas-tu ce soir?" Richard asked, his own French passable from business dealings. Emma looked up with a small smile. "Je vais bien, merci," she replied, her accent flawless. Richard sat beside her on the window seat. "You know you're safe here, right?" Emma nodded, but her eyes drifted toward the darkened window. "He's not what he pretends to be," she said suddenly. "When the supervisors look away, his eyes change." "What do you mean?" "They get cold, like he's wearing a mask that slips sometimes." She hugged her knees to her chest. "I think that's why I have the nightmares. I remember those eyes from before." Richard pulled her into a gentle hug. "I promise you, Emma, he cannot hurt you here, and soon Judge Harding will make her decision about the adoption. What if she says no? Then we appeal, we fight, for as long as it takes." Emma leaned against him trustingly. "Jack says you never break promises." "That's right, and I promise both of you will always have a home with Oliver and me." That night, as a precaution, Richard moved a comfortable chair into the hallway between the children's rooms and sat reading through legal briefs. Around 2 a.m., Emma's door opened and she emerged, clearly sleepwalking. Richard gently guided her back to bed, tucking the covers around her small form. "No escape," she murmured in her sleep. "He'll find us." Richard brushed the hair from her forehead. "Not this time," he whispered. "This time, you have me." Outside, spring rain pattered against the windows while security guards patrolled the perimeter. Richard returned to his chair, his resolve hardening. Matthew Pierce's next move would come soon. Richard could feel it. But this time, unlike when Eleanor faced Matthew's manipulation alone, the Pierce children had resources, protection, and a father figure who would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. The suspension of Matthew's visitation rights lasted 3 weeks while the school security breach was investigated. During this time, both children showed marked improvement. Emma's nightmares decreased, and Jack's hypervigilance eased. In early June, 12 months after their lives intersected, Richard received notification that Judge Harding had scheduled their final adoption hearing for June 20th. Harrison was optimistic about their chances given Matthew's recent behavior, but cautioned against overconfidence. "Pierce has been unusually quiet since the suspension," Harrison noted during their strategy meeting. "No legal challenges, no media interviews, no attempts to contact the children." "That concerns me more than if he were fighting openly," Richard admitted. Their concerns proved justified on June 10th, when Jack discovered an unfamiliar email on his school tablet, sent directly to his private account. "Jack, I'm your father, and I love you. The court is keeping us apart unfairly. If you want to see me, come to Franklin Park at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Don't tell Blackwood. He's turned your sister against me, but I know you're smart enough to think for yourself. I have proof he's only using you to make his own son feel better. Come alone if you want the truth. Dad." Jack immediately brought the tablet to Richard, his expression troubled. "He's trying to separate us," he observed with precocious insight. "Divide and conquer." Richard contacted Judge Harding's office immediately. The judge ordered Matthew to appear for an emergency hearing the next day, coinciding with the time he'd suggested meeting Jack. In court, Matthew feigned ignorance initially, then indignation when presented with the email evidence. "I was desperate to maintain connection with my son," he argued. "The suspension of visitation was unjust." Judge Harding was unmoved. "Mr. Pierce, you violated multiple court orders with this contact. You suggested a minor child meet you secretly without his guardian's knowledge. This shows profound disregard for this court's authority and your children's well-being." Matthew's carefully constructed facade began cracking. "They're my children. This man has had them for a year. I've lost 5 years already. The system is rigged against fathers like me." "Mr. Pierce," Judge Harding said sternly, "your behavior demonstrates exactly why supervised visitation was necessary. I'm extending the suspension indefinitely and ordering a complete psychological reevaluation before considering any restoration of visitation privileges." As they left the courtroom, Matthew's expression darkened with barely contained rage. Richard instructed his security team to remain on high alert, sensing that Matthew Pierce had reached a dangerous breaking point. The following weekend brought Emma's 7th birthday celebration, a modest garden party with classmates from Wellington Academy. Emma had blossomed socially over the past year, forming genuine friendships beyond her special bond with Oliver. Richard watched proudly as she conversed in French with her language teacher, who had come bearing books as gifts. Jack hovered protectively nearby, still watchful despite the security team discreetly positioned around the property. Oliver presented Emma with a handmade card containing a poem he'd written himself, causing Emma to throw her arms around him in a fierce hug. Richard captured the moment on camera, his heart full. That evening, as Richard tucked Emma into bed surrounded by her new books, she asked thoughtfully, "Is it okay to be happy when someone else is angry?" "What do you mean, sweetheart? I'm happy here with you and Oliver and Jack, but my real dad is angry about it. Does that make me bad?" Richard chose his words carefully. "Your happiness never makes you bad, Emma. Adults are responsible for their own feelings. Your father's anger is his to manage, not yours to fix." Emma considered this. "My mom used to say that happiness is the best revenge." Richard smiled sadly. "Your mother sounds very wise." "She would have liked you," Emma said with certainty. "She always said what matters most is being kind and brave. You're both." After Emma fell asleep, Richard found Jack in the media room, not watching the large screen, but staring contemplatively into space. "Heavy thoughts?" Richard asked, joining him on the sofa. Jack nodded. "I was thinking about my real name." "Pierce." "No, My whole name, Jackson Matthew Pierce. I was named after him. His expression reflected distaste. I don't want his name anymore. Richard placed a gentle hand on Jack's shoulder. If the adoption goes through, you could change it. Jack looked up hopefully. To Blackwood, if that's what you want. Jackson Richard Blackwood. Jack tried the name carefully, then nodded with satisfaction. That sounds right. The moment was interrupted by a security alert on Richard's phone. A car had been circling the neighborhood for the past hour, a rental registered to a fake ID, but the driver matched Matthew Pierce's description. Jack, stay inside with Oliver and Emma, Richard instructed calmly, not wanting to frighten the boy. I need to check something with security. Outside, Richard conferred with his head of security. He's testing our perimeter, looking for vulnerabilities, the security chief assessed. Standard preparation for something bigger. Alert the police, Richard ordered. We have the restraining order from Judge Harding and double the overnight team. That night, Richard again slept in the hallway between the children's rooms, a precaution that had become habit during high-stress periods. Around 3 a.m., his phone buzzed with another security alert, this time showing Matthew Pierce himself at the property's service gate, clearly intoxicated, attempting to override the keypad. Police arrived within minutes, arresting Matthew for violation of the restraining order. By morning, Harrison confirmed that Matthew had been released on bail, but fitted with an ankle monitor restricting him to his apartment, except for work and legal appointments. This works in our favor for the adoption hearing, Harrison noted. His behavior is increasingly erratic, demonstrating poor judgment where the children are concerned. But Richard took little comfort in the legal advantage. Matthew's escalating desperation made him unpredictable and dangerous. And desperate men rarely played by legal rules, something Richard understood all too well from his own hard-scrabble rise to success. With the final adoption hearing just a week away, Richard knew Matthew Pierce would make one last attempt to reclaim his children. The only question was what form that attempt would take, and whether Richard could anticipate and prevent it before Jack and Emma paid the price. The week before the final adoption hearing unfolded with tense anticipation. Richard increased security yet again, adding plainclothes guards who accompanied the children to and from school. Wellington Academy implemented strict protocols about visitor access, and Judge Harding ordered Matthew to surrender his passport given his recent boundary violations. On June 19th, the eve of the hearing, Richard gathered with Harrison Porter and his legal team for final preparations. The children were upstairs with Mrs. Sullivan, packing special outfits for court. We've covered every contingency, Harrison assured him. Pierce's recent behavior has destroyed his credibility with Judge Harding. The psychological re-evaluation confirmed narcissistic tendencies and anger management issues. Catherine's testimony about his past abuse of Eleanor is properly documented. The children's clear preference to stay with you is on record. Richard nodded, but couldn't shake his uneasiness. Matthew knows he's losing. That makes him dangerous. The ankle monitor restricts his movement, Harrison reminded him. And we have the restraining order. Deet, pieces of paper don't stop desperate men, Richard replied grimly, remembering his own childhood witnessing domestic violence in his neighborhood. We're missing something. Later that evening, Richard found Oliver in his room, carefully selecting a tie for the next day. At 12 years old, Oliver had matured significantly over the past year, not just physically through his therapy, but emotionally through his bond with Jack and Emma. Are you nervous about tomorrow? Richard asked. Oliver shook his head. It's going to work out, it has to. He selected a blue tie that matched Emma's favorite color. Jack and Emma belong with us now. Richard smiled at his son's certainty. When did you get so wise? Probably around the time you taught me that family isn't just about blood. Oliver looked up earnestly. Dad, even if something goes wrong tomorrow, which it won't, we'll still fight for them, right? Absolutely, for as long as it takes. Richard checked on Jack next, finding him meticulously organizing documents in a folder. What's all this? Evidence? Jack replied seriously. My school records, Emma's achievements, our improvement since living here, just in case the judge needs reminding. Richard's heart swelled at Jack's thoroughness. Harrison has all this covered, but I appreciate your preparation. Finally, Richard visited Emma, who sat cross-legged on her bed surrounded by stuffed animals arranged in what appeared to be a council meeting. We're discussing tomorrow, she explained when Richard raised an eyebrow at the setup. Mr. Whiskers thinks the judge will say yes right away. Penelope is worried about our father trying something sneaky. Richard sat on the edge of the bed. And what does Emma think? She considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. I think our mother is watching over us, and she would want us to be where we're happiest. She looked directly at Richard. That's here, with you and Oliver. As Richard kissed her goodnight, Emma held on to his hand. I had a dream that wasn't a nightmare, she said. We were all together on a beach somewhere warm. Jack and Oliver were building a huge sandcastle, and you were teaching me to swim. Everyone was laughing. That sounds like a wonderful dream. Emma nodded solemnly. I think it was the future. After the children were asleep, Richard made one final security check before retiring to his own room. The house was quiet, save for the steady rainfall outside, a summer shower that drummed soothingly against the windows. Richard was almost asleep when his phone rang, Catherine calling from London, where it was already morning. Just checking in before my flight, she said. I should land in Boston by 4 p.m. your time, barring delays. We'll send a car to meet you, Richard assured her. How are the children? Surprisingly calm. More certain of the outcome than I am. Catherine laughed softly. Children often see things more clearly than we do. Their instincts are unclouded by adult complexities. After they hung up, Richard found himself unable to sleep. He moved to the window, watching rain cascading down the glass while security guards patrolled below, their forms occasionally illuminated by lightning. His phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. Final preparations complete. Court documents organized. Medical reports secured. Character references compiled. We're ready. Richard replied with simple thanks, then continued his vigil at the window. After a year of emotional investment, legal battles, and growing love for Jack and Emma, tomorrow would determine whether they officially became Blackwoods or remained in limbo while Matthew continued fighting. Across town, unknown to Richard, Matthew Pierce sat in his small apartment, the ankle monitor blinking on his leg as he stared at old family photos, Eleanor with the children as babies, before his crimes tore their family apart. His expression shifted between grief, rage, and calculation as he turned to his computer, where a final, desperate plan was taking shape. Outside the Blackwood mansion, the storm intensified. Inside, 3 children slept peacefully, trusting in Richard's protection and the justice system's wisdom. Richard finally returned to bed, setting his alarm earlier than necessary, determined to leave nothing to chance on this most important of days. Neither man, biological father, nor chosen guardian could know how their collision course would resolve in the coming hours, or the price that might be paid before Jack and Emma's future was finally secured. The morning of the adoption hearing dawned bright and clear after the night's storm. Richard woke the children early, wanting to ensure a calm, unhurried preparation. Breakfast was a cheerful affair, despite the underlying tension. Mrs. Sullivan prepared everyone's favourites, and Catherine called from her departure gate in London to wish them luck. Jack wore his best suit, looking remarkably grown up for 10 years old. Emma had chosen a blue dress with a Peter Pan collar that made her look both sophisticated and endearingly young. Oliver matched his father in a navy suit, his tie coordinating with Emma's dress, a subtle symbol of their hoped-for official siblinghood. "Remember," Richard reminded them as they prepared to leave, No matter what happens today, we remain a family. The adoption simply makes official what we already know in our hearts." The drive to the courthouse was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts. Security vehicles preceded and followed their car, a precaution that had become routine but felt particularly necessary today. At the courthouse, they were directed to a private waiting room. Harrison joined them, reviewing final details while they waited for Judge Harding to call their case. The children sat together on a bench, Jack and Oliver flanking Emma protectively. "Mr. Pierce and his attorney have already arrived," Harrison informed Richard quietly. "He appears subdued today, professional attire, respectful demeanor." Richard nodded, though inwardly this news heightened his concern. Matthew's sudden compliance after weeks of escalating behavior seemed suspicious. At 10:30 a.m., the bailiff summoned them to Judge Harding's courtroom. As they entered, Richard noticed Matthew sitting with Gloria Winters, his expression unreadable. Matthew's gaze followed the children as they took their seats, lingering on Emma, who unconsciously shifted closer to Oliver. Judge Harding called the proceedings to order, reviewing the extensive case history before addressing Matthew directly. "Mr. Pierce, I understand you wish to make a statement before I render my decision." Matthew stood, his manner surprisingly composed. "Yes, Your Honor, with your permission." "Proceed." Matthew turned partially toward the children, though he maintained appropriate distance per the restraining order. "Jack, Emma," he began, his voice steady, "I've done a lot of thinking these past weeks about what it means to be a father, about what your mother would want for you." Richard tensed, preparing for manipulation, but Matthew's next words surprised everyone. "I've been selfish, thinking about what I wanted, my rights, my children, without considering what's truly best for you." His voice caught slightly. "Your mother protected you from me because I was destructive, unpredictable. I see now she was right to do so." Jack and Emma exchanged confused glances, while Gloria Winters shifted uncomfortably beside her client. "You found a real home with Mr. Blackwood," Matthew continued. "Stability, education, love, things I couldn't provide, even if given the chance." He turned to face Judge Harding. "Your Honor, I'm withdrawing my objection to the adoption petition. I believe it's in my children's best interest to remain with Mr. Blackwood permanently." A stunned silence fell over the courtroom. Harrison leaned toward Richard, whispering urgently, "This is unexpected. Be cautious." Judge Harding studied Matthew carefully. "Mr. Pierce, I want to be absolutely clear. You're voluntarily relinquishing your parental rights to facilitate this adoption?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've prepared a statement to that effect." He nodded to Gloria, who presented documents to the bailiff. Judge Harding reviewed the papers, then looked back at Matthew with obvious skepticism. "This is a significant reversal from your previous position, Mr. Pierce. May I ask what prompted this change of heart?" Matthew glanced briefly at the children, seeing their fear of me. Recognizing the damage my selfish pursuit was causing them. He paused, and remembering that Eleanor, despite everything, was a good mother who only wanted their happiness and safety, I believe she would approve of Mr. Blackwood as their adoptive father. Judge Harding turned to Harrison. "Does Mr. Blackwood wish to proceed with the adoption given this development?" Richard stood, still wary of Matthew's sudden capitulation, but unwilling to delay the children's security. "Yes, Your Honor, absolutely." After reviewing Matthew's statement and confirming its legality with court officers, Judge Harding addressed the children directly. "Jack and Emma, please stand." They rose, holding hands tightly. "Do you both understand what's happening today? That Mr. Blackwood wishes to legally adopt you, and that your biological father has agreed to this?" Jack nodded firmly. "Yes, Your Honor, we understand." "And is this what you want?" "More than anything," Emma said clearly, her young voice carrying through the courtroom. Judge Harding smiled for the first time that day. "In that case, Having reviewed all evidence, testimonies, and relevant documentation, I hereby grant the petition for adoption. Jack and Emma Pierce are now legally Jack and Emma Blackwood, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. She brought down her gavel with finality, then added more gently, "Congratulations to your new family." Emma burst into tears of relief, while Jack stood shell-shocked until Oliver whooped with joy, breaking the tension. Richard gathered all three children into his arms, his own eyes wet. Across the courtroom, Matthew Pierce watched silently, his expression inscrutable, before quietly exiting with Gloria Winters. Richard noted his departure with lingering suspicion, but forced himself to focus on the children's happiness in this moment. Outside the courthouse, they posed for photos that Catherine had arranged. Official documentation of the day Jack and Emma Blackwood came into legal existence. As they prepared to leave, Harrison approached with news. Pierce's ankle monitor shows he's returning directly to his apartment. His sudden cooperation is surprising, but the legal documentation is airtight. The children are officially yours, Richard. Richard nodded, but couldn't shake his uneasiness despite the joyful outcome. Have security maintain surveillance on Pierce for the time being. This resolution seems too easy after his previous determination. As they drove home to the celebration Mrs. Sullivan had prepared, Richard pushed aside his concerns to focus on the children's happiness. Today marked the official beginning of their life as a complete family. Whatever Matthew Pierce's true motives, they would face them together. 3 days after the adoption, Richard's security team reported that Matthew Pierce had quit his job, terminated his apartment lease, and disappeared. The ankle monitor had been removed following the court proceedings, and though no laws had been broken, Matthew's sudden vanishing act intensified Richard's lingering concerns. "We've got people monitoring transportation hubs and his known associates," the security chief assured Richard, "but he appears to have left Massachusetts entirely." Richard instructed them to maintain vigilance even as he tried to focus on the children's adjustment to their new legal status. Emma had embraced the Blackwood name immediately, practicing her new signature with pride. Jack had requested a special document frame for his adoption certificate, which now hung beside his academic awards. Catherine returned to London after a celebratory weekend, promising to visit for Thanksgiving. Life settled into a new normal, with summer vacation, allowing all three children more time together. Oliver's physical therapy continued to show promising results. He could now stand unassisted for nearly a minute. In late July, 13 months after Emma's brave intervention on the playground, Richard took the family to their beach house on Cape Cod, fulfilling Emma's prophetic dream. For 2 blissful weeks, they built sandcastles, collected shells, and watched spectacular Atlantic sunsets. Richard taught Emma to swim, Jack learned sailing, and Oliver discovered he could move more freely in water than on land. "This is the happiest I've ever been," Jack confided to Richard one evening as they sat on the deck watching Oliver and Emma hunting for hermit crabs in the twilight. Richard smiled. "Me too, Jack. Do you think he's really gone, for good?" The question revealed Jack still harbored the same concerns as Richard. "I hope so," Richard answered honestly. "But if not, we'll handle it together." August brought preparation for the new school year. Jack would enter 5th grade, Emma 2nd, and Oliver 7th, all at Wellington Academy, where they'd thrived the previous year. School shopping, placement testing, and end-of-summer reading assignments occupied the children while Richard gradually reduced security measures, allowing for more normal activities. On the night before school began, Richard found Emma in the library, organizing her new books with characteristic precision. "Nervous about tomorrow?" he asked, joining her on the floor amid stacks of colorful volumes. Emma shook her head. "Not about school. I like learning." She hesitated. "But I had another dream last night." Richard felt a flicker of concern. Emma's dreams had proven unnervingly prescient in the past. "What kind of dream?" "About him," My first father. He was standing outside our house watching, but he looked different somehow, and he wasn't angry anymore, just waiting." She looked up at Richard. "Do you think dreams can tell the future?" Sometimes I think they tell us what we're worried about," Richard answered carefully. "Are you worried about him coming back?" Emma considered this. "Not really. Not anymore. In the dream, I wasn't scared of him, just aware of him." Richard hugged her reassuringly. "Well, if he is watching from somewhere, what he'll see is you thriving, growing into an amazing young woman, and that's all that matters." The first month of school passed uneventfully. The children excelled academically and socially, their confidence growing with their security. Even Jack relaxed his vigilance, focusing more on his advanced coding projects than on checking window locks. In late September, 14 months after their lives intersected, Richard received an unexpected envelope at his office, postmarked from Arizona with no return address. Inside was a brief, handwritten note. "Blackwood, I meant what I said in court. Take care of them. They deserve better than me. I won't contact them again, but someday they might have questions only I can answer. If that time comes, you can reach me through Gloria Winters, MP." Richard showed the note to Harrison, who had it analyzed for authenticity. "It appears genuine," Harrison confirmed. "Arizona would explain his disappearance. Do you want us to locate him more specifically?" Richard considered the question carefully. "No. If he's truly stepping back, we should respect that, but maintain basic monitoring in case this is misdirection." That evening, Richard contemplated sharing the note with Jack and Emma, but decided against it. They were finally moving forward without fear, developing normally, without the shadow of their biological father looming over them. The knowledge that Matthew was watching from afar might reawaken their anxiety. Instead, he filed the note in his private safe, available if the children ever did have those questions Matthew anticipated. As autumn leaves began changing color across the Blackwood estate, Richard watched the three children racing through piles of gold and crimson, their laughter echoing across the grounds. Oliver could take several steps unassisted now, though he still relied on his wheelchair for distance. Jack had developed interest in cross-country running, building physical strength to match his intellectual abilities. And Emma had joined the children's choir, her clear voice as precise and beautiful as her mind. They were healing, growing, blossoming, just as they deserved. And if Matthew Pierce was indeed watching from somewhere in Arizona, Richard hoped he could see that his final decision, whatever its motivation, had been the right one. That night, Richard found all three children in Oliver's room, huddled together, planning their Halloween costumes. Their easy camaraderie, the natural way they included each other, reinforced what Richard had known from the beginning. These children belonged together. "Dad!" Oliver called when he noticed Richard in the doorway. "We're going as famous scientists this year. I'm Stephen Hawking, Jack is Alan Turing, and Emma is Marie Curie." Richard smiled at their thoughtful choices, each meaningful in different ways. "Sounds perfect." Later, after tucking Emma into bed, she caught his hand. "I didn't have any dreams last night," she told him with a smile. "Just good sleep." Richard kissed her forehead. "That's exactly as it should be, sweetheart." For the first time in 14 months, Richard truly believed they might have reached the end of their difficult journey. Matthew Pierce's shadow had lifted, and the future stretched before them, bright with possibility, secure in love, and rich with the promise of the extraordinary adults these children would become. 6 months passed in peaceful productivity. The Blackwood family settled into comfortable routines, celebrating holidays and achievements with equal enthusiasm. Jack turned 11 in December, Emma 7 in June. Oliver continued making progress with his physical therapy, now able to walk short distances with specialized crutches. By April, 20 months after their lives intersected on that fateful playground, Matthew Pierce's whereabouts remained known only to Gloria Winters, who confirmed he was respecting the adoption and making no attempts to contact the children. Richard maintained minimal surveillance, but focused primarily on building their future rather than guarding against the past. On a bright Saturday morning, Richard received a call from Wellington Academy's headmaster. Jack had been selected as one of 10 students nationwide to attend a prestigious summer coding camp at MIT. His mathematical algorithms had impressed university professors who reviewed applications anonymously, unaware they were evaluating a fifth grader's work. "Dad!" Jack burst into Richard's study, waving the official acceptance letter that had arrived by courier. "I got in. I'm going to MIT this summer." Richard hugged him proudly. "I never doubted you would. Your mother would be incredibly proud." Jack's expression softened at the mention of Eleanor. "I think about her sometimes, wondering what she'd think of everything." He hesitated. "Do you think she'd be okay with us being Blackwoods now?" "I think she'd be grateful knowing you and Emma are loved, safe, and thriving," Richard answered honestly. "Names are important, but what matters most is the love behind them." Later that day, as the family celebrated Jack's achievement with a special dinner, Oliver proposed a toast. "To Jack, future MIT graduate and probably the next Bill Gates." Emma raised her sparkling cider glass solemnly. "To Jack, the best big brother in two families." Her innocent comment highlighted something remarkable. Despite the trauma of their early lives, both Pierce children had integrated their past and present identities. They honored Eleanor's memory while embracing their new family, a healthy balance Richard had carefully nurtured. The following week brought Emma's own academic triumph. She had tested at a 6th grade reading level and 4th grade mathematics, exceptional even at Wellington's accelerated pace. Her language skills continued to flourish. She was now conversational in Spanish, alongside her fluent French. One evening in late April, Richard was reviewing company financials when his private line rang. A number few people possessed. Richard Blackwood. "Mr. Blackwood, this is Gloria Winters." The attorney's voice sounded strained. "I have news regarding Matthew Pierce that may impact the children." Richard's grip tightened on the phone. "What's happened?" "Matthew was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 2 months ago. He's declined rapidly and is now in hospice care in Tucson. He asked me to inform you because—" She paused. "He's requesting a final video call with the children to say goodbye." The request stunned Richard. After nearly 2 years of legal battles, unexpected surrender, and then complete absence, Matthew Pierce's final communication was this: a deathbed request to see the children he'd ultimately relinquished. "I'll need to consider this carefully," Richard replied. "The children have finally found stability. Reopening this connection could disrupt that." "I understand. Matthew expected this response," Gloria said. "He wanted me to tell you he has no agenda beyond closure. His doctors give him days, perhaps a week. If you decide against the call, he accepts that as the consequence of his earlier actions." After hanging up, Richard sat motionless, weighing impossible options. Denying dying Matthew might seem cruel and could spark resentment from Jack and Emma later in life when they learned of this refused opportunity. Yet allowing contact risked reopening emotional wounds just as they'd finally healed. Richard consulted Catherine by phone and Dr. Lowell in person, seeking guidance before approaching the children. Both suggested the same course: present the situation honestly and let Jack and Emma decide for themselves. That evening, after Emma's ballet practice and Oliver's physical therapy, Richard gathered the family in the library, their traditional space for important conversations. "I received a call today about your biological father," he began carefully, watching Jack and Emma's expressions. "He's very ill, terminal cancer. He's asked to speak with you both by video call before he passes away." Jack's face remained impassive, but Emma's eyes widened with surprise. "He's dying?" she asked softly. Richard nodded. "Yes, very soon, according to his doctors." "What does he want to say?" Jack asked suspiciously. "I don't know precisely. His attorney said he's seeking closure, but this decision belongs to you both. If you don't want this contact, that's completely your right. If you do, I'll arrange it and be present the entire time." Jack and Emma exchanged glances, communicating silently as they often did in important moments. "Can we think about it?" Emma finally asked. "Of course, but time is limited, days rather than weeks." The children requested privacy to discuss their decision. Later that night they came to Richard's study with their answer. "We'll talk to him," Jack stated, "but together, not separately, and you stay with us." "Of course," Richard agreed, relief mingling with apprehension. "I'll arrange it for tomorrow." The following afternoon, Richard set up a secure video call in his study. Jack sat straight-backed in a leather chair, Emma perched beside him. Richard positioned himself slightly behind them, supportive but allowing them space for this final conversation with their biological father. When Matthew's image appeared on screen, Richard barely recognized the man. Once robust and intimidating, Matthew was now gaunt, his skin yellowed, hospital equipment visible in the background. Despite his physical deterioration, his eyes were clear and focused as they found his children. "Jack, Emma," he said, his voice weaker than in court but steady, "thank you for agreeing to speak with me." Jack nodded stiffly while Emma studied the screen with solemn curiosity. "I don't deserve this chance," Matthew continued. "But before I go, I wanted to tell you 3 things. First, I'm sorry for everything. For not being the father you deserved, for disrupting your lives after you found stability, for thinking my rights mattered more than your happiness." He paused, gathering strength. "Second, I want you to know that your mother was extraordinary, the best person I ever knew. Everything good in you comes from her." Emma leaned forward slightly. "Did you love her, our mom?" Matthew's expression softened. "Very much. But I wasn't worthy of her. My own demons destroyed what we had." Jack finally spoke. "And the third thing?" "The third thing is that you're exactly where you belong, with a father who puts you first, with a brother who accepts you completely." Matthew's gaze shifted briefly to Richard. "Blackwood has done what I couldn't, built you a real family. Be grateful for that gift." For 20 minutes, the children asked questions about their early lives, their mother, family history. Matthew answered everything honestly, without excuses or manipulation. As the call neared its end, his energy visibly waning, he made a final request. "Could you call me Dad? Just once. I know I haven't earned it, but—" "Goodbye, Dad," Emma said softly, surprising everyone with her gentle mercy. After a moment, Jack nodded. "Goodbye, Dad. Rest easy." Matthew's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. Be extraordinary." "You already are." The screen went dark. Emma turned into Richard's embrace, while Jack sat motionless, processing the complex emotions of the moment. Richard held them both, offering silent support as they navigated this unexpected closure. 3 days later, Gloria Winters called to inform them that Matthew Pierce had passed peacefully in his sleep. With him died the last threat to their family's unity, leaving the Blackwoods to move forward unburdened by fear or uncertainty. That evening, as spring rain tapped gently against the windows, Richard found Emma in the garden room, drawing pictures of a man she barely remembered but had finally made peace with. "Are you okay?" Richard asked gently. Emma nodded. He wasn't a monster, just a broken person who made bad choices. She looked up with wisdom beyond her years. "I'm glad we said goodbye." 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Richard Blackwood sat on a bench in Central Park, watching his 3 children feeding ducks at the pond. 2 years had passed since Emma's brave intervention on that Jefferson Elementary playground. 2 years of challenges, growth, and ultimately triumph. Oliver, now 13, walked carefully with his specialized crutches. His physical therapy had progressed remarkably, allowing him increasing independence. Jack, 11, had returned from MIT's summer program with mentors eager to nurture his extraordinary mathematical talents. And Emma, 7, had recently tested at an 8th grade reading level, her linguistic gifts continuing to flourish as she added Italian to her language repertoire. "Dad!" Emma called, waving him over. Oliver walked all the way around the pond without stopping. Richard joined them, pride warming his chest at Oliver's accomplishment. "That's nearly a quarter mile. Impressive work, son." Oliver beamed, his confidence growing with each physical milestone. "Dr. Levine says I might be able to use just a cane by next summer if I keep progressing." After Matthew Pierce's death, the final pieces of their family's security had fallen into place. Catherine visited regularly from London, maintaining the children's connection to their maternal heritage. Gloria Winters had delivered a surprising final message from Matthew. Trust funds he had established for both children using his life insurance policy, with Richard as trustee until they turned 25. Richard had initially hesitated to accept the funds, but ultimately recognized them as Matthew's final attempt at responsible fatherhood. The money was now invested for the children's future education, a contribution from their biological father to the bright futures their adoptive father was helping them build. As they walked toward the exit, planning to visit the Natural History Museum next, Richard's phone rang with Catherine's London number. "Perfect timing," he answered cheerfully. "We're all together in New York for the weekend. The children want to say hello." "Actually," Catherine replied, her voice carrying a smile, "I can see you right now." Richard turned to find Catherine Montgomery approaching from the park entrance, wheeling a small suitcase behind her. "Aunt Catherine!" Emma squealed, running to embrace her. After hugs and exclamations, Catherine explained her surprise visit. "The London assignment ended early. I've accepted a permanent position at the State Department in Washington. I'll be just a short flight away now." They celebrated with lunch at a restaurant near the park, the children chattering excitedly about having their aunt nearby for holidays and special events. Catherine watched them with affectionate wonder. "They've changed so much," she commented to Richard as the children debated museum exhibits. "I hardly recognize the frightened, malnourished children from 2 years ago." "They amaze me daily," Richard agreed. "But I see Eleanor in them too. Her resilience, her intelligence." Catherine nodded, her expression growing thoughtful. "Ellie would be so grateful, not just for the material things, but for how you've preserved their essence while helping them heal." After the museum, they returned to their hotel suite, where Mrs. Sullivan had arranged a special dinner to celebrate Catherine's surprise arrival. As they gathered around the table, Richard proposed a toast. "To family, those with us, those watching over us, and those whose love continues to shape us even in absence." Later that evening, while Catherine entertained Oliver and Jack with stories of diplomatic adventures, Richard found Emma on the suite's balcony, gazing at the New York skyline. "It's so bright," she observed as he joined her. "Like the whole world is awake." Richard smiled at her poetic observation. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Emma nodded, then turned to him with the directness that was uniquely hers. "Dad, are you happy? With us?" The question caught Richard by surprise. "Incredibly happy. Why do you ask?" "Sometimes I think about how different your life would be without Jack and me, all the problems and worry we caused." Richard knelt to meet her eyes. "Emma, listen carefully. Before you and Jack came into our lives, Oliver and I were surviving, not living. Caroline's death left a hole nothing could fill. Then you appeared, this tiny warrior standing up for my son when no one else would." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You and Jack didn't complicate our lives. You completed our family. Never doubt that for a second." Emma's smile bloomed slowly. "I'm going to write a book someday about all of us, about how families can be made in different ways." "I'll be first in line for an autographed copy," Richard promised. Inside, Jack called them to join a board game Catherine had brought from London. As they gathered around the coffee table, Oliver strategizing moves, Jack calculating probabilities, Emma translating the British terminology, Catherine and Richard exchanging amused glances, Richard was struck by how perfectly these separate pieces had formed a whole. 2 years ago, a chance encounter on a playground had changed everything. A billionaire watching his disabled son from a distance, a homeless girl with extraordinary courage and compassion, a protective brother forced to grow up too soon, a bereaved boy in a wheelchair longing for connection. From those broken beginnings, they had forged something remarkable, a family bound not by blood, but by choice, by love, and by the daily decision to stand by each other no matter what challenges arose. Outside the window, New York City sparkled with possibility, much like the futures that now stretched before Jack, Emma, and Oliver Blackwood, bright with promise, rich with opportunity, and secure in the knowledge that whatever paths they chose, they would always have a home to return to and a father who believed in them completely. The game proceeded with laughter and friendly competition. 5 people from different origins, now united as family, the most remarkable and enduring bond of all.